He fought for his country in wars overseas, but now he's fighting a different battle for survival on a cold city sidewalk. Over 70 years old, alone, hungry, and too proud to ask for help, until hunger left him no choice. This is a story of loss, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to start over. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe in the power of hope and second chances, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, get ready to feel every moment of this powerful journey. The concrete was cold beneath him, even through the layers of worn fabric. Harold Mathis, 73 years old, sat hunched on a quiet stretch of sidewalk just off Jefferson Avenue, knees drawn in, back pressed against a graffiti-tagged wall. The morning sun had barely broken through the haze, but already his stomach ached with emptiness. He hadn't eaten in 6 days. A week ago, he would have called the idea of begging humiliating. He'd spent a lifetime standing tall in the Marines, in steel-toed boots on construction sites, even later, pushing a mop in the hallways of a high school. But life had a way of peeling pride off layer by layer, like paint on an old wall. He hadn't wanted to come here. He'd stayed in the alley behind the grocery store the first few nights, curled beneath a tarp, hoping no one would see. But last night had been bitter, cold, and somewhere inside, something had snapped. Not broken, just bent. Now, a small cardboard sign lay across his knees. The words scrawled in block letters. Veteran. Hungry. Anything helps. He hated every letter. People passed. Some glanced quickly and then looked away, like making eye contact would cost them money. Others didn't look at all, too absorbed in phones or conversation, or the simple mission of walking fast enough to avoid noticing suffering. One woman, maybe in her 20s, dropped a granola bar in front of him. She didn't say a word. He managed a nod. She was gone before he could even whisper thanks. He stared at the wrapper. Apple cinnamon. Not his favorite, but at that moment it felt like a feast. He opened it with shaking fingers. As he chewed, slowly, he closed his eyes. And just like that, he was back in '69. Vietnam. The jungle heat was thick, like syrup in his lungs. Gunfire cracked in the distance, and he felt the familiar weight of the M16 against his chest. He was 20 years old, strong, terrified, and invincible all at once. His best friend Darren had just made a joke about Spam in a can, and the two of them were laughing, actually laughing, when a mortar landed 10 yards ahead. He saw Darren's boots fly first. The granola bar caught in his throat. He coughed hard, eyes flying open, gasping against the rush of memory. A boy, maybe 15, stood watching him from a few feet away. Skinny, in a school hoodie and headphones. He hesitated. "You okay, sir?" Harold cleared his throat. Yeah. The boy gave him a long look, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and placed it gently next to the sign. "I hope things get better for you," he said. Harold opened his mouth to say thank you, or maybe don't do that, or maybe tell him he used to be someone, but the boy was already jogging off, head down. The $5 bill sat on the pavement, too clean for its surroundings. He hadn't cried in over 20 years, but suddenly his eyes burned. The $5 bill felt too heavy in his hand. Harold stared at it, his thumb brushing over the worn texture. It had been years since someone gave him anything he hadn't had to earn with sweat or shame. He tucked it carefully inside his coat pocket, next to the medals no one ever asked about. The morning air was warming slightly, but he still shivered. Maybe it was age, or maybe it was hunger again already gnawing at his insides. The granola bar had dulled the sharpest edge, but his body wanted real food. Eggs, toast, coffee hot enough to burn the tongue. He hadn't had a real breakfast in. He couldn't remember. From the corner of his eye, he saw a man in a suit cross to the other side of the street when he approached. Harold chuckled under his breath, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar now it no longer stung. 10 years ago, that man in the suit might have worked for Harold. Before the layoffs. Before Linda died. Linda. Her name floated in his mind like a fragile thread of smoke. He saw her hands first, the way they folded laundry while humming Stevie Wonder, the way they brushed the side of his face every morning even after 38 years together. Her smile came next. A little crooked, tired from motherhood and work and bills, but still radiant, still all his. He remembered the last night in the hospital, holding her hand as her breath grew shallow. "I'm tired, Hal," she'd whispered. "I know, baby," he had said. "You can rest." She had, and Harold had never really woken up since. He blinked the memory away and looked down the street. There was a diner 2 blocks away. He knew it well. He and Linda had gone there after church almost every Sunday for years. The same waitress, Ruby, always greeted them with a grin and an extra refill of coffee. He wondered if Ruby still worked there. $5 wouldn't get much, but maybe coffee, maybe toast. He stood up slowly, knees stiff and crackling like old twigs. The sign he'd made slid off his lap and onto the sidewalk. He hesitated, then left it there. He wouldn't be needing it for a little while. Each step toward the diner felt like climbing a hill, not just because of his aching joints, but because of what it meant, entering a place where he might be recognized, or worse, pitted. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The warmth hit him like a wave, along with the smell of grease, bacon, and old coffee. The place hadn't changed. Red vinyl booths, yellowed menus, country music playing low. And behind the counter, Ruby. She looked older now, like they all did. But she still had the same tight bun of graying hair and the same lipstick that never quite matched her blouse. She was pouring coffee for a customer when she turned and saw him. Her eyes widened. "Harold?" He managed a nod, suddenly ashamed of the way he looked, the overgrown beard, the dirty coat, the sunken cheeks. "Oh my God," she said, setting the pot down and rushing around the counter. "Honey, where have you been?" He wanted to lie. Say he'd been traveling. Say he was just passing through. But when her arms wrapped around him, tight and honest, the lie collapsed. "Just down," he murmured. "It's been rough." Ruby stepped back, her hands still gripping his arms. She looked at him like someone trying to recognize a childhood photo in an old album. "You sit. Anywhere you like. I'll bring you something. Don't even think about money." He opened his mouth to protest, but she was already walking toward the kitchen, shouting an order to someone inside. Harold sat slowly at the counter, his eyes scanning the room. A young couple in the corner whispered and glanced his way. An old man in a veteran's cap raised 2 fingers in a silent salute. Harold returned it, chest tightening. Minutes later, Ruby returned with a plate, scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of toast, and a small pile of hash browns. The steam rose like hope. He stared at it a moment, then picked up his fork. The first bite of egg made his throat ache with gratitude. They didn't speak much as he ate. Ruby wiped down counters that were already clean. Every few minutes, she'd glance at him and smile softly. When he finally finished, Ruby poured him coffee and leaned on the counter. "You staying somewhere?" she asked. Harold shook his head. "Not really." Ruby pursed her lips. "There's a guy who runs a veterans shelter on 3rd and Maple. You ever think about checking it out?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Those places, they're not always good. This one is. Real clean. Real safe. They don't ask a lot of questions. I can call him for you, if you want." Harold looked down at the empty plate, then at his hands. Calloused. Scarred. Still shaking a little. He didn't want pity. But maybe this wasn't pity. Maybe it was something else. He nodded slowly. "Okay. Yeah, I think I'd like that." Ruby smiled. "Good. I'll call him now." As she walked toward the phone, Harold looked out the diner window. The street outside was still busy, cars passing, people rushing by, heads down, worlds elsewhere. But inside, for the first time in a long time, he felt warm. The van that came for him was plain white with peeling paint. The driver was a young man named Darren, no older than 30, with freckles, kind eyes, and a quiet voice. He didn't ask questions, just helped Harold into the front seat, made sure the heater was on full blast, and offered him a bottle of water. They drove through the parts of the city Harold hadn't seen in months. Places that had once been familiar now felt like a map he'd forgotten how to read. Grocery stores, bus stops, parks where Linda used to feed the birds. Everything kept moving, but he'd stayed still. "You a vet, sir?" Darren asked gently. Harold nodded. "Vietnam." "Yeah. 69. 3rd Battalion, Marines." Darren smiled a little. "My dad served too. Desert Storm. He don't talk about it much." Harold gave a small grunt of recognition. "Some things you leave buried." They pulled up to a modest 2-story building tucked between an old laundromat and a liquor store. A small blue sign out front read, "Homefront Shelter for those who served." It didn't look like much, but it smelled clean when he stepped inside, disinfectant and fresh laundry. The walls were lined with framed photos of veterans, young men and women in uniform, all pride and discipline. A woman named Clara greeted him at the front desk. She had soft silver curls and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. "Welcome, Mr. Taylor," she said, reading his name from the intake form Ruby must have filled out. "Let's get you settled." They gave him a room, small, but private. Just a bed, a dresser, and a tiny window that looked out over the alley. Still, It was more than he'd had in months. More than just shelter, it was dignity. That night, Harold lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. He kept one hand resting over the pocket of his coat, where the medals were still tucked safely. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. A piece of ribbon with Linda's handwriting on it, faded and curled at the edges. Come home to me, Hal. Always. He hadn't cried when Linda died. Not at the hospital. Not at the funeral. Not when the mortgage swallowed the house. But now, lying in a warm bed, full for the first time in days, surrounded by silence, the tears came. He turned his face to the wall and let them. Morning came too quickly. Darren showed him the showers and gave him a towel. Harold scrubbed until his skin was raw, like he was trying to wash away not just dirt, but shame. When he looked in the mirror, he almost didn't recognize himself. Less ghost, more man. They gave him clean clothes, simple jeans and a button-up shirt. He folded his old coat carefully and placed it at the bottom of the dresser, medals still tucked inside. After breakfast, Clara invited him to join a group session. Harold started to decline, but something in her voice, the way she said, "You don't have to talk. Just sit with us," made him nod instead. The group met in a circle of old chairs in a room that smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. 5 men and 1 woman, all older, all worn. Some had visible scars. Some didn't. One wore sunglasses indoors and kept tapping his foot. They went around the circle, first names only. "I'm Charles. Navy, 72. Name's Benny. Iraq. I'm Helen. I was a nurse in Afghanistan." When it came to Harold, he hesitated. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. "Harold. Marines. Vietnam." The others nodded. No questions. No stories. Just acknowledgement. The kind only soldiers give. Helen was the first to speak again. She talked about her son, how he wouldn't let her visit since she got back. Said she was too different now. Her voice didn't crack, but her hands trembled in her lap. Charles talked about the nightmares, jungle sounds, blood, boys screaming. Harold listened. He said nothing. But inside, something was opening. A door that had been sealed shut for years. That afternoon, he sat outside the shelter on the front step, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made the world feel still. A boy passed by with a skateboard, glancing at Harold with curiosity, then skating on. No fear. No judgment. Just interest. It reminded him of his grandson. Marcus had been 10 the last time Harold saw him. A wild little thing with dreadlocks and a laugh that could fill a whole room. They'd gone fishing once. Marcus caught a catfish with a stick and a paperclip. Harold had called him MacGyver all afternoon. But after Linda died, Harold stopped coming around. His son, Terrence, had tried it first. But Harold pushed everyone away. Anger was easier than grief. He hadn't spoken to Terrence in 6 years. A soft voice brought him back to the present. "Mind if I sit, sir?" It was Darren, holding 2 mugs. Harold nodded, and Darren joined him. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," Harold said. They sat in silence for a moment. "You think you'll stay a while?" Darren asked. Harold thought about it. He didn't know. He didn't like relying on anyone. But the truth was, he was tired. Tired of being cold, hungry, invisible. "I'll stay," he said. "For now." Darren nodded, like he understood something Harold hadn't even said. "I heard you helped build a community center back in the day," Darren said. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you hear that?" "Ruby." Harold chuckled. "That woman talks too much. She said you were the kind of man who made things happen." Harold looked out at the street. People still passed by without looking. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a ghost among the living. "I used to be," he said. "Maybe you still are," Darren replied. That night, Harold unpacked the little ribbon from his coat and placed it on the nightstand beside his bed. "Come home to me, Hal." He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "I'm trying, baby." And this time, when he closed his eyes, sleep came easier. The days started to blur into something like a rhythm. Mornings with bitter coffee and eggs. Afternoons in quiet halls where tired men played checkers or stared out windows. Evenings filled with stories and sometimes, not often, laughter. Harold stayed quiet through most of it. He listened more than he spoke. There was comfort in the way other veterans spoke, not polished or poetic, but honest, even when broken. He began helping Clara organize the kitchen. He didn't mean to. It started with him offering to fix the flickering light bulb, then the door hinge, then the busted drawer that jammed every time someone reached for the silverware. Before long, he was tightening screws, wiping counters, writing down what was missing from the pantry. Clara teased him one morning, You trying to take my job, Mr. Taylor? He only grunted, but something in him swelled, not pride exactly, but usefulness. He hadn't felt that in a long time. One quiet afternoon, Harold stood alone in the hallway, staring at a bulletin board. Most of the papers were yellowed or half-ripped, job postings, lost gloves, volunteer flyers. But one photo caught his eye. A black and white image of a young man in uniform, eyes steady, shoulders square. Underneath it read, James Miller, age 22. Kia, June 18, 1969. Harold reached up and gently touched the edge of the picture. The date made his heart drop. June 18, 1969. The jungle had been loud that day. Mosquitoes and machine guns and someone screaming for their mother. Miller had taken point. He'd been joking about pancakes just minutes before the mine went off. Harold remembered holding what was left of him. He remembered vomiting behind a tree, then marching forward like nothing had happened. He hadn't said James' name in 50 years. Now he whispered, "I'm sorry, kid," and walked away. That night, during group, he spoke for the first time. "My son used to ask me what the war was like," he said. Silence fell in the room. I told him it was hot. I told him it smelled like mud and smoke and fear. But I never told him about Miller, or the ones we couldn't save. I thought I was protecting him. But maybe I was just protecting myself. Helen nodded slowly. We all got ghosts we keep in the dark. Harold glanced around the room. He stopped calling after a while. My boy, Terrence. Thought I didn't care. Thought I was cold. And were you? Asked Benny, one of the younger vets. Harold didn't answer for a moment. I was scared. Didn't know how to love without breaking. The next morning, he found Clara in her office and asked if they had internet access. She raised an eyebrow. We do. You trying to look up old flames? He chuckled. Not unless they're also my son. She smiled gently and pointed him to a computer. It had been years since he typed anything. His fingers moved slow, clumsy on the keyboard. He typed in Terrence's full name and city. A LinkedIn profile came up. Terrence Taylor, Director of Community Outreach, Oakland. He stared at the screen for a long time. The profile photo showed Terrence in a suit, smiling, standing beside a banner that read, Building Futures Together. That was something Harold had said once, back when they built the community center together in East Richmond. You don't build buildings, you build futures. And now here his son was, doing exactly that. Harold reached into his coat pocket, felt the outline of his medals, and the worn ribbon. He whispered, You did good, son. Later that week, Darren approached him with a clipboard. Some of the younger vets are building planter boxes in the back courtyard. Vegetable garden. We're looking for someone who can, keep things from falling over. Harold raised an eyebrow. You saying I'm old or that I'm useful? Both, Darren said with a grin. The next morning, Harold was out back, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. There were 3 younger men already working, all Iraq or Afghanistan vets. One of them, Luis, was missing half a leg and still moved faster than Harold. Another, Jeremy, barely spoke but nodded respectfully every time Harold gave him a tip on leveling. The dirt smelled like spring. The sun warmed Harold's neck. He hadn't built something with his hands in years. That evening, he found Ruby sitting on the front steps. She still came by sometimes, checking on those she'd helped. When she saw him, she smiled. Hey there, mystery man. Pay yourself. You're looking stronger. He shrugged. Could just be the sunlight. They sat together for a while, watching people pass. A teenager zipped by on a scooter. A couple argued in low tones across the street. Ruby glanced sideways. You ever think about leaving this place? Harold nodded. Sometimes. You should. Not because you don't belong, but because maybe there's more waiting. He looked down at his hands, rough, veined, still strong. I haven't earned that yet. You already did, she said. Long before you even knew me. He didn't answer, but he thought about it all night. The next morning, he asked Clara if he could use the phone. Long distance. He hesitated. Yes, ma'am. She handed it to him with a soft smile. He stepped into the hallway. Dialed a number he wasn't sure still worked. 3 rings. Then, hello. It was his son. Harold nearly dropped the phone. He cleared his throat. Terrence. It's Dad. A long pause. Then, Dad? Yeah. I'm calling to say I'm sorry. I was wrong to push you away. I've been thinking about you. About Marcus, too. Another pause. Then Terrence's voice cracked. We thought you were dead. I almost was. Silence again. Then, where are you? Harold looked around at the shelter, the photos, the smell of coffee, the sound of hammering in the back courtyard. Trying to come home, he said quietly. For the rest of the day, Harold carried the sound of his son's voice like a fragile treasure. It echoed in his chest, even when others spoke to him. Even when he tried to focus on the planter boxes or his chores. The words, "We thought you were dead," circled in his mind, over and over again. Terrence had sounded older, deeper. But there was something in his tone, maybe hesitation, maybe hurt, that Harold recognized. It was the same voice from years ago, when a teenage boy had stood on the porch with his bags packed, saying, "You never talk to me. I don't know how to love someone who won't let me in." Harold hadn't chased after him then. He'd stood still, jaw clenched, as the only person who ever called him Dad disappeared down the street. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. That evening, Clara brought him a small envelope with his name on it. "It came while you were out back," she said. Harold opened it slowly. Inside was a bus ticket Oakland, one way. There was a note folded behind it in Terrence's handwriting. "Come if you're ready. I'll be here." Harold stared at it for a long time. His first instinct was fear. Not the kind he'd felt in combat, but something deeper, fear of being seen. Of standing in front of the man his son had become and realizing he didn't measure up. He folded the paper and tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. He would go, but not tonight. The next morning, Harold asked Clara if she had any spare clothes. "You mean besides that war-torn jacket and boots from the Nixon era?" she teased. He grunted. "Something decent. Nothing fancy. Just something a father might wear." She smiled softly and brought him a clean shirt, some khakis, and a weathered blue cardigan. "This belonged to my brother," she said. He'd want it to mean something again. Harold took the clothes in his arms, heavy with gratitude. "Thank you." He left the shelter 2 days later. Ruby came to see him off. She held his hand longer than she needed to. "You're not done," she said. "But you're walking forward. That counts." "I don't know what I'll say when I see him." "Start with, 'Hi, son.' Then listen." He chuckled. "You always make it sound easy." "It's not," she said. "But it's right." The bus ride to Oakland was quiet. The countryside rolled past, yellow hills, rusted fences, dying trees. Harold sat near the back, watching everything blur by. He thought of the letters Terrence used to write when he was stationed overseas, short, eager, messy handwriting. "I made the baseball team. We're learning fractions in school. Mom says I'm growing taller than you." He kept them all in a cigar box. But during a particularly bad night in '82, after one too many drinks and too many memories, he'd burned the whole box. He regretted it every day since. Oakland smelled different. Busier. Louder. The sidewalks bustled with people, bikes, laughter, honking horns. Harold stood on the curb for a while, unsure of where to go. The city felt too big, too fast for someone like him. But then he spotted Terrence. He was standing on the steps of a brick building, wearing a button-down shirt and dark jeans. His hair was grayer than Harold remembered, his shoulders broader. In his arms, a small child squirmed, a boy no older than 5. Harold's chest tightened. Terrence saw him and smiled, hesitant, but real. "Dad." Harold walked slowly toward him. He didn't know what to do. Shake his hand? Hug him? Terrence stepped forward and wrapped his arms around him. Harold froze at first. Then his body, stiff from years of holding everything in, finally allowed itself to soften. He hugged his son, tightly, like a man afraid he'd disappear again. Inside the building was a small community center, clean, bright, with walls painted in calming blues and greens. Children played in a corner. A woman at the front desk offered Harold water with a kind smile. Terrence led into an office in the back. The boy, his grandson, sat in a beanbag, flipping through a picture book. "This is Micah," Terrence said. "Micah, this is your grandpa." Micah looked up with big brown eyes. "Hi," he said quietly. Harold blinked hard. "Hi there, little man." Micah offered him the book, and Harold took it. Later, over tea, Harold and Terrence sat in silence for a while. Then Harold said, "I was scared. All those years. Afraid I'd mess up more than I already had." Terrence nodded. "I used to think you didn't care. But I get it now. Pain does strange things to people." "I missed everything," Harold said. "Graduation. Your first job. Your wedding. I missed meeting Micah when he was born." Terrence looked at him. "But you're here now." Harold swallowed. "If you'll have me." His son smiled. "I already do." That night, Harold slept on a pull-out couch in Terrence's guest room. The sheets were soft. The ceiling was quiet. No shouting, no sirens, no shaking hands. Just stillness. He stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking of James Miller, of Ruby, of Clara and Darren and the garden. of the long road back from the edge. He wasn't whole yet, but maybe he didn't have to be. He reached into his pocket and took out the ribbon from his medals. He tied it to the handle of the nightstand drawer, like a small flag, a reminder, not of war, but of survival. The next morning, Harold woke early. The guest room was still dark, the street noise distant through the window. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the ribbon on the nightstand and remembered. He sat up slowly. His bones ached. His back popped like old floorboards. In the kitchen, Terence was already up, sipping coffee in a faded t-shirt. The smell hit Harold like a memory, mornings with his wife, the clink of spoons, the radio humming softly. "Morning," Terence said. Harold gave a short nod. "Didn't want to sleep in." "No rush," his son said. "You've got time now." Time. The word felt unfamiliar. Time had always been something that either slipped away or pressed too hard. Never something that waited for him. Later, they walked together to a nearby park. Micah ran ahead, chasing pigeons, laughing freely. Terence kept pace beside Harold, silent at first. "Then, I looked for you. After Mom died." Harold stopped. The breeze shifted. "I know. I checked hospitals, shelters, VA centers. I was angry, but I still hoped." Harold looked down. "I wasn't ready to be found. And I thought, maybe I didn't deserve to be." Terence didn't answer right away. He watched Micah fall in the grass, then pop up again with a grin. "Deserve or not, I'm glad you're here." They sat on a bench near a tree. "Micah's mom?" Harold asked. Terence's smile faded. "She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Quick. Unfair." Harold closed his eyes briefly. "You did all this alone?" "Still doing it," Terence said with a tired smile. "But we manage." Harold looked at his grandson. "He's got her eyes?" "Exactly her eyes." Back at the apartment, Harold offered to help cook dinner. He wasn't much of a chef, but he knew how to peel potatoes and season meat. Terence raised an eyebrow. "Last time you cooked, I was 12, and we almost burned the porch." Harold chuckled. "Let a man redeem himself." Micah climbed onto a stool and helped stir. Flour ended up on the counter, on his shirt, in his hair. "Grandpa's messy," he giggled. "We're wounds," Harold said with mock gravity. Micah saluted. "Like a real soldier?" Harold paused. "No, son. Real soldiers don't brag about it. They just try to live after." The boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded, solemn and small. Harold looked at him and felt something deep stir, something he hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. That night, alone in the guest room, the quiet pressed in. Harold sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. They were rough, veined, calloused, hands that had held rifles, buried friends, written letters he never sent. Now they held spoons and opened juice boxes and ruffled a child's hair. He wasn't sure what to do with that shift. His mind wandered, uninvited, to a day in Vietnam. Rain had poured for hours. His best friend, Louis, had stepped on a mine just feet ahead. They'd pulled what was left of him into a tarp. Harold remembered vomiting behind a tree, then pressing forward, as ordered. Survive. Keep walking. Don't feel. He had lived like that ever since. He woke up from a nightmare, soaked in sweat. The room was dark. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then a soft knock. Micah stood in the doorway, blanket in hand, eyes wide. "I heard you yelling." Harold sat up. "Sorry, little man. Just a bad dream. Can I stay with you?" Harold hesitated, then nodded. Micah climbed in and curled beside him, small and warm and real. Harold stared at the ceiling. His heart slowed. The boy murmured something about dinosaurs. Harold closed his eyes and let himself drift, the weight on his chest easing. Just a little. The next day, Terence took Harold to the local VA center. "I thought maybe you could talk to someone," his son said gently. Harold stiffened. "I don't need a shrink. Not a shrink. Just someone who's seen what you've seen." Harold considered. In the waiting room, the air smelled of hand sanitizer and old paper. Posters lined the wall. "You're not alone. Healing takes time." He nearly turned back. Then a woman stepped out. Mid-50s, black, calm eyes. "Mr. Holloway?" He nodded. "Come in when you're ready." He followed her. Her name was Patrice. She didn't ask him to talk, just offered tea. They sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "How's the weather in your chest?" Harold frowned. "What? Is it stormy? Still? Or just overcast?" He almost laughed. "Been raining for 50 years. She smiled gently. "That's a long storm to carry." He looked down at his hands again. "Sometimes I think I'm still there. In the jungle. In the mud. Patrice nodded. Then let's find the way back. He didn't speak again, but he didn't leave. On the way home, he sat beside Terrence on the bus. The streets rolled by. Graffiti on walls. Kids on bikes. Life, unpaused. You don't have to stay forever, Terrence said quietly. Harold looked at him. But I want to. Terrence nodded. That's enough. The week passed quietly. Harold began rising earlier than the others, making coffee before Terrence woke, folding blankets, checking the weather through the window like it still mattered. Every other day, he walked to the VA center. He didn't always talk. Sometimes he just sat across from Patrice in silence, watching the dust move through the slant of the morning sun. But he kept coming back. One afternoon, Micah dragged a dusty cardboard box into the living room. It was marked in black ink, Dad's stuff, storage. I found treasure, the boy said proudly. Terrence glanced over. Micah, you shouldn't. But Harold raised a hand. It's okay. He settled onto the floor beside his grandson, the old joints cracking as he bent. Inside the box were remnants of a past Harold hadn't touched in decades. A rusted lighter. A pocket knife. A faded green journal. A photo of his platoon, young men with crooked smiles, eyes too old for their age. Micah pulled out a medal. What's this? Harold swallowed. Silver Star. Did you win it? Harold shook his head. Wasn't a game. The boy grew quiet. Terrence, from the kitchen, said softly, he earned it saving 3 men under fire. Never told anyone. Harold frowned. Wasn't for glory. Micah looked up at him. You were brave. Harold looked away. I was just scared enough to move. That night, Harold stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door to his own room. He held the photo of his old unit in his hands. Lewis was there, second from the right, one eyebrow always raised like he didn't trust the photographer. You should have made it home, Harold whispered. He pressed the photo against his chest, feeling the heaviness of 50 years rest between his ribs. Then, for the first time in a long while, he cried. Silently. Not from pain, but from the ache of memory finally surfacing. The next morning, he found Terrence fixing a loose hinge on the front closet door. Got a screwdriver? Harold asked. Terrence blinked. Yeah, but I've got it. I know, Harold said. Still, let me. He worked quietly, his hands finding familiar patterns. Turning, tightening, balancing. Terrence watched. When Harold finished, he stood slowly, back stiff. Terrence spoke first. I remember you fixing the garage door when I was 7. You were swearing the whole time. Harold grinned. That door was cursed. They both laughed. It was small, but it felt like a wall between them cracked open, just a little. Later that week, Harold sat with Patrice again. He held the old photo in his lap. His name was Lewis. I saw him die, and I kept walking. Patrice listened. Do you blame yourself? I don't know, Harold admitted. But I think I never stopped carrying him. Patrice sipped her tea. Then maybe it's time to set him down. Not to forget, but to forgive yourself. Harold shook his head. I don't know how. Patrice smiled gently. Start by letting someone else carry part of the weight. The following Sunday, Terrence took Micah to a friend's birthday party. Harold stayed behind. He sat in the kitchen, staring at a note Micah had left. Draw with me later? Dinosaurs. There was a crayon doodle, a T-Rex with a helmet. Harold chuckled, then walked over to the cabinet. From the box he had unpacked, he took out the journal, the one from Vietnam. He opened to the first page. Blank. Then, slowly, he began to write. Not a war story. A letter. To Lewis. He wrote about the boy in the other room, about the Silver Star, about the way grief had molded his life like wet cement hardening over time. He wrote until the page blurred with tears. The next day, he and Micah went to the park. The boy insisted on bringing toy dinosaurs. Harold sat on a bench, watching him roar and chase pigeons. Then Micah looked up. Grandpa. Yeah, you're not sad all the time anymore. Harold blinked. You think so? The boy nodded. You laugh now. And you draw dinosaurs. Harold chuckled. You've got me there. Micah came over and held out a small hand. Harold took it. Warm. Steady. Real. At home, Terrence found the letter Harold had written. It was left open on the table. He didn't read all of it. Just enough to understand. Later, when Harold returned from his evening walk, Terrence stood in the kitchen. Dad? Harold paused. Terrence walked over and hugged him. It was brief. Tight. Then let go. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. It started with a question. At the VA center, Harold sat across from Patrice, sipping weak coffee. She was flipping through intake notes when she paused. Would you ever want to talk to younger vets? Harold frowned. Me. She nodded. You've seen the bottom. And you got up. He chuckled dryly. Still feels like I'm halfway on the floor. Maybe. But they need to hear from someone who's been there. He didn't answer then. But the question followed him home. 2 days later, Harold sat in a narrow room at the back of the center. Across from him were 3 young men, all in their 20s. Nervous. Hard faces, twitching knees. The kind of eyes that had seen too much too soon. He didn't lecture. He didn't even introduce himself. He just said, I've been hungry. And angry. And alone. The room went still. I begged with my pride cracked like bone. Slept behind dumpsters. Punched brick walls just to feel something. You're not weak for being here. You're human. One of the men shifted, biting his lip. Another stared at the floor, blinking hard. Harold took a breath. Getting up again. It's not a straight road. You crawl. You fall back. You curse at the sky. But you keep moving. Afterwards, one of the younger vets, a tall guy with a shaved head and shaking hands, waited for Harold by the exit. Hey, he said. You really slept outside? Harold nodded. The man looked away. I thought I was the only one that far gone. You're not, Harold said. And you're not done either. The man blinked fast, then nodded and left. Harold stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. For the first time in years, he felt useful. At home, Harold started keeping a routine. He helped Terrence fix the leaky bathroom pipe. He cooked scrambled eggs for Micah. He wrote in the journal every night, sometimes letters to Lewis, sometimes just thoughts. And every Friday, he returned to the VA center and sat with whoever showed up. He never gave advice. Only stories. Stories about loss. About fear. About finding scraps of light in the middle of darkness. They listened. Because he didn't pretend to have answers. Only scars. One evening, Harold sat on the back porch with Terrence. Micah was inside, watching cartoons. The sunset painted the sky in strokes of orange and blue. You ever regret it? Terrence asked. The service. Harold was quiet. I don't regret serving. I regret what it took from me. And what I let it take afterward. Terrence nodded. I was angry at you. For disappearing when Mom died. For shutting me out. I know, Harold said. I thought maybe I was the reason. Harold turned. His eyes, though tired, were clear. You were never the reason. You were the only good thing left. I just didn't know how to hold on. Terrence looked down. Then, quietly, I'm glad you're here. Harold smiled. So am I. The next week, Micah had to draw a family tree for school. He worked hard with crayons and markers. When he showed it to Harold, there was a stick figure at the top with big eyebrows, holding a walking cane and a dinosaur toy. That's you, Micah said proudly. Harold laughed. You gave me a cane? You said your knees sound like popcorn. He snorted. Well, you're not wrong. Micah grinned. Harold pinned the drawing to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a smiling sun. That night, Harold went through the old box again. At the bottom, beneath a folded flag and torn envelopes, he found something he hadn't seen in years. A photo of himself in uniform, holding a baby. Terrence. He stared at it for a long time. The younger version of himself looked strong, confident. But there was something in the eyes, that quiet fear of not knowing how to be a father, of trying to be more than what war had left behind. Harold traced the edge of the photo. He whispered, I'm still trying. At the VA center that Friday, a woman sat in the corner, maybe in her 40s. Short hair, sharp jawline, arms crossed. She didn't speak. Harold told a story about the time he walked for 2 hours in the rain just to find a shelter that turned out to be closed. How'd you not lose it? One man asked. Harold shrugged. I probably did, but I just kept going. The woman finally said something. Why? Everyone turned to her. Harold met her eyes. Because I didn't want to disappear. Not like that. Not forgotten on a sidewalk. She nodded. No more questions. But she came back the next week. One afternoon, Harold and Micah sat on the stoop, watching squirrels chase each other. Micah said, Do you think squirrels have grandpas? Harold smiled. Maybe the wise ones. Micah leaned against him. You're my wise grandpa. Harold swallowed hard. Thanks, buddy. I'm glad you came to live with us. I think Mommy would have liked that. Harold blinked back the sudden sting in his eyes. Yeah, he whispered. I think she would have too. That night, Harold wrote another letter. This one wasn't to Lewis. It was to himself. And for the first time, he signed it with love. It was a Tuesday morning when it arrived. A plain white envelope, no return address, slightly crumpled around the edges. Terrence brought it in, holding it between 2 fingers. This came for you. Weird handwriting. Kinda old school. Harold raised an eyebrow, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He took the envelope slowly and stared at the name. Harold E. Moore. Not Mr., not Dad. Just that, his name in familiar, almost childlike cursive. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper. And a photo. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. Dear Harold, if you're reading this, I probably never had the courage to send it myself. But I'm writing it anyway, because there's too much I never said. You remember the old diner off 6th Street? The one with the cracked booths and burnt coffee? You used to take me there on Saturdays after your shifts. I'd always order pancakes. You'd always read the paper. I used to watch your eyes, how they never stopped scanning, like you were always waiting for something bad to happen. Back then, I didn't understand. I just thought you were cold or strict. I didn't know what war does to a man, but I do now, because I went too. And I came back with shadows I couldn't explain. But the thing is, I had you, even if I didn't realize it. You were trying. You were fighting something bigger than me, and you still showed up. So thank you. I forgive you for the years you disappeared. I forgive you for the silence. And I hope, wherever you are, you found peace. Love. Lewis. Harold couldn't breathe for a moment. He stared at the signature, traced the loops of the L, the sharp angle of the W. Then he looked at the photo. It was a picture of the two of them, Lewis in his own uniform, laughing with his arm around his father, who looked slightly awkward but proud. It must have been taken just before Lewis's last deployment. Harold sat down heavily on the couch, the photo trembling in his hands. Terrence stood by the door, watching. Dad, he said softly. Harold blinked. He held out the letter. Terrence read it slowly, then looked back at his father with wide, wet eyes. He wrote this before. Harold nodded. Guess he just never mailed it. Terrence sat beside him. You okay? No, Harold whispered. But I'm better than I've been in years. That night, Harold stood in the backyard under the stars. He clutched the photo to his chest. And for the first time in a long time, he spoke to the sky. Thank you, son, he said, voice shaking. You saved me. Even now. The next week, Harold returned to the VA center with the letter. He read it out loud. When he finished, no one said a word. Even the woman with short hair had tears on her cheeks. Harold folded the paper carefully. It's never too late to forgive, he said. Or to be forgiven. At home, Micah asked, Can you come to my school? Harold blinked. Why? We're doing a hero day. Mommy said I can pick someone. I picked you. Harold felt his heart twist. You sure you want an old man with squeaky knees and missing teeth? Micah giggled. You're my hero. Harold chuckled, then knelt. Well then, I'll wear my best pants. On Hero Day, Harold stood in front of a room full of children. He didn't wear his medals. Just a clean shirt and a simple smile. He talked about service. About helping. About kindness. One little boy raised his hand. Did you kill people? There was a long pause. Harold's face didn't change. I went to war. Yes, he said. But the thing I'm most proud of is coming home and learning how to be kind again. The room was silent. Then a girl whispered, That's hard, huh? Harold smiled. Yes, but it's worth it. Later that night, as the house quieted, Harold added a page to his journal. He wrote about the school, about Lewis, about healing. He wrote, Every day I thought I was done, but turns out I was just beginning. Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed with reckless color. Even the cracked sidewalks outside Harold's apartment seemed softer under the sun. People smiled more. Or maybe Harold just noticed it now. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But he woke up every morning with a roof over his head, food in his fridge, and a reason to get out of bed. He had Micah's laughter echoing through the halls. He had Terrence's quiet support. And he had a small, unshakable sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He volunteered twice a week at the local shelter now, not just to hand out food, but to listen, to sit beside those who'd lost their way, just like he had. Sometimes he shared his story. Other times, he just held silence like it was a sacred thing. People recognized him on the street now, not because of his military record, but because he listened and remembered names and asked how their mothers were doing. One afternoon, as he stepped out of the shelter, he saw her. The little girl from that first day. The one who'd given him $1 and a kind word when he was sitting hopeless on the sidewalk. She was walking with her mother, a tired-looking woman with eyes too old for her face. The girl held a paper bag and a juice box. Harold's heart skipped. He walked up slowly, cautious not to startle them. Excuse me, he said, voice warm. I think we've met before. The girl blinked up at him. You're the man who was on the ground, she said, not unkindly. Her mother tensed. Is there a problem? Harold smiled. Not at all. I just wanted to say thank you. For what? The woman asked, narrowing her eyes. For that day. Your daughter. She saved my life. The woman's expression softened a little, confused but open. Harold knelt, gently. You gave me water, he said to the girl. And you looked at me like I mattered. She tilted her head. You did matter. Harold nodded, blinking away moisture. That meant more than you'll ever know. The mother stared at him for a moment, then said softly, You okay now? Harold stood. Better than I've been in decades. The girl beamed. You look different. Like, happy. I am, he said. Thanks to people like you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a simple note. Sometimes one kind act is enough to change a life. Thank you. Taped to it, a gift card for groceries. For your family, he said. Please. The mother tried to refuse, but Harold gently insisted. I know what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask. She finally nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Really? The girl hugged him suddenly, arms tight around his waist. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. Harold swallowed hard. No, he said. I'm not. That night, Harold sat on his porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. The sky was streaked with pink and gold. Micah ran out barefoot, laughing. Grandpa, look, I drew you. He held up a crayon drawing a man with a cane, a medal on his chest, and a big, goofy smile. You made me look like a superhero, Harold chuckled. You are one, Micah said simply, then dashed back inside. Harold smiled, folding the drawing carefully into his journal. He thought of all the years he'd spent hiding, running from ghosts, regretting. And now, he was part of something again. Not the military, not the world of medals and discipline and silence, but something deeper. A family, a neighborhood, a small, fragile network of people who chose to care. Later, he wrote, I used to believe that surviving the war was my greatest achievement, but I was wrong. Learning how to live again, that's the real victory. In the final week of spring, Terrence came home holding an envelope. It's from the city council, he said. Want me to open it? Harold shrugged. Might as well. Terrence read the letter, his eyebrows climbing. Dad, they're inviting you to speak. At the memorial service. Downtown. They want you to share your story. Harold stared. Me. Terrence nodded. They say you've inspired a lot of people. Word gets around, I guess. Harold chuckled softly, shaking his head. Well, he said after a moment, let's give them something worth remembering. On Memorial Day, Harold stood before a crowd at the city square. His cane tapped softly against the wood of the stage. He didn't wear his full uniform, just his old jacket, a modest pin on the lapel, and Micah's crayon drawing tucked into his pocket. He looked out at the faces, young, old, rich, poor, black, white, and began. I've worn many uniforms in my life. A soldier's, a husband's, a father's, a broken man's. He paused. But the most important one? The one I wear now? It's the uniform of a neighbor, a listener, a man who chose not to give up. People leaned in. I once sat on a sidewalk, starving and ashamed. I thought no one cared. I thought my story had ended. But a little girl gave me water and hope. He smiled. And now, I pass it on. One small act at a time. The applause was thunderous. But Harold didn't care about that. He cared about the look in Micah's eyes, pure pride. That night, after everyone had gone, Harold returned to the sidewalk where it all began. He sat for a moment, just breathing. Then he stood up and walked away.